Hello and welcome to the Dyno Six Pack Dynasty Football Podcast. We got a really fun show today. I'm joined by my buddy Keith Flemming. How you doing today, man?
Doing really good. Arthur Smith is no longer the Falcons coach. I
was
had a
gonna say we're
really
probably
good day financially on DFS. It's all coming
you
together,
did.
JJ. So
I did. I was gonna say
good.
we're equally happy this morning, but for like completely different reasons. Like my
Right.
Cowboys won the division and got the 2 seed, and then Arthur Smith, and I'm like, I don't know which fan base is happier this morning, and it's like it's legitimate either
It's
way.
the Falcons because we rooted for the Saints yesterday. And if you're a real Falcons fan, you did. And if you know that, like, I don't think it gets enough pub. We hate each other. I hate Saints fans. I hate the Saints. I never root for them. Yesterday was the first time, other than the Peyton Manning Super Bowl, just because that was when I was a big Brady guy and I wanted it for selfish reasons. But I was full stock. Like when Ritter was 7-7 for $157 and 2 touchdowns, it was pretty dark. In the text thread between me and my dad and our buddies going, man, they're all coming back. This is the worst case scenario. And then luckily the second half happened. And I need to send I guess a gift basket to Jameis Winston as well.
Oh man, I love Jameis, man. Like, did you see like the interview afterwards with like the reporter? He's like, I'm trying to be honest. Like, it was like the most incredible thing.
He should be cut though. I mean, you can't have that on your roster. It's like he even said the phrase, I know that, coach called this, but we decide. And it's like, that is a bad look when, the coach and team are not we together.
Yeah. I think that's more of a Dennis Allen problem, honestly, man. I love Jameis, man. Put that guy on my team any day as my backup quarterback. I love it, man. You were kind of asking me, like, right before I record my shirt here. It's Toilet Titles. Wanted to give a shout out to those guys over there. Justin over there, man. He's awesome. They had a booth right next to us at the expo. And so I played in like a Frankensteak league with them this year, which was like the most insane thing. I couldn't even imagine trying to commission. It's like a 96 team league. Where like you have 12 team leagues built within it, but you're also playing in like a season-long tournament. And like they did an amazing job commissioning it for how much was going on. Like there was twice that I put illegal lineups just on my little stuff that was like, oh, I guess that is right there in the rule books, but there's just so much little stuff going on. So yeah, shout out to those guys. They're awesome. But yeah, so what we're going to do today, everybody's kind of done, I think their New Year's resolutions. I think it's pretty poetic that like in real life, I'm starting mine about a week late into the year. So we're going to go over those today. And it's kind of going to be a little bit of a mix of just kind of some lessons that we learned from this past season, kind of some dynasty strategy things we're taking into next year. It's kind of our overall resolutions that we're going to take into the 2024 dynasty season. Jamie, what's up, man? Thanks for tuning in here. If you have any questions along the way, drop those in the comments. And when we kind of hit like breaking points throughout it, we'll go ahead and hit those. So definitely any questions you got, go ahead and throw those there. Before we get started, though, head on over to fantasy6pack.net/plans, become an all-access member. Man, talking about making some money on DFS, you get access to our DFS and betting projections. We'll let Keith kind of talk about that before we get into it too much here. You're going to get all of our advice, our rankings. I do dynasty rankings. I'm in the process of doing my off-season reset right now. So aiming by the 15th, I'm going to have a full, fresh set of dynasty tiers that I'll kind of take into draft season with me next year and into like the NFL draft season. So we're just kind of getting started there. And then best of all, you get access to our Discord forum as well, where we're all in there answering questions that are more tailored to like your exact fantasy leagues. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. Some of the best bang for your buck that you can get in the fantasy industry, in my opinion. So head on over there and do that. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into the meat of the show here. So I have about 17 total things I kind of wanted to touch on, but I wanted to split them up a little bit more into groups here. And the overall number one kind of lesson, and it's not a lesson learned this year, like it's something I've learned the last couple of years, and I really exercised it more than ever this year, and it was my most profitable year in Dynasty yet. And that is just overall, it's going to be patient. There's so many teams you see that just like panic sell the first time something goes wrong and they have to make full sell things, or they go to 0-2 and they're completely tearing down their roster. So for Dynasty leagues, man, you just got to slow down and be patient. So we're going to break this into kind of 4 subsections here. So the first thing that I'm going to kind of talk about in this kind of area is number one, like do not let 4 games at the start of the year prevent you from taking a game changer in a draft or a trade. Whether that's a guy like Kamara who's suspended, you guys that are on the pup like JT, Devon A-Chain kind of starting the year coming injured, whatever it is. Cup's another great one. Do not let 4 games at the start of the year prevent you from taking a game changer. We saw so many guys that slid in drafts because of that. And I don't know why we do it every year. It seems
Tyler Murray.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Murray was a game changer down the stretch. I mean, there was guys that like I drafted that were, coming in late like that. Like JT was an example, and he won some leagues for me the last few weeks of the season. So yeah, I'm not going to let 4 games kind of deter me from taking a guy that's going to help me down the rest of the way. It's going to be my number one kind of takeaway I've taken from this year. And we saw a lot of guys like that this year with how many injuries there were down the stretch.
Yeah. And I mean, not just the, drafting or be patient with injuries, but players in general. And I saw Jamie put in the comments, and he's right. Like somebody like CeeDee Lamb this year, right? Like think about what we were saying 2-3 weeks in. You need to be patient with your guy. James Conner, another guy, right? That like got injured. And I'm sure there was people selling him, you know what I'm saying? Like trying to get away from that. And a lot of times all you got to do is just be in the hunt with 3-4 weeks remaining. And you can, as long as your team is strong by that point of the season, you usually can make a run, get in. And then it just seems like every year the teams that barely get in usually end up, winning the leagues because they're hot. It's just like what happens in the NFL playoffs. But I absolutely like, just don't overreact to stuff. Because like Lamb was the guy last year that I thought last year was going to be this year for Lamb. Like I went out and basically said, exactly what Lamb ended up doing this year, I thought was last year. I was like, Dallas is going to throw it to him, 30% of the time. It's just going to be the Lamb show. And early this season, that wasn't the case. And then luckily they figured it out. He's an unbelievable player. I'm still bitter because the Falcons could have taken him when we took AJ Terrell 2 picks before in that draft. And I think he's one of the best players in the league. And it just reminds people that just because things start slow or don't start bad, really, just take a breath and understand, it can get better. And especially if a player has a pedigree. I mean, we didn't know Lamb was going to go to this level, but he had been so good that it didn't matter that he kind of got off to that shaky start.
Absolutely. Yep. Kind of this goes right into my next lesson that I have here. And that's second year in a row I've seen it, man. The real fantasy season, it doesn't really start till week 5 or 6. I have nobody cares about your fantasy teams, I know, but like my most important dynasty team, the last 2 years, I have started 0-5 and I have finished 3rd place last year. And then I won the league this year. So you're going to have, like you said, those CeeDee Lambs that start slow. You have guys that get injured in the preseason. As long as you're kind of in the mix there, week 5, 6, even if you only have 0 or 1 wins, as long as you can kind of put it together and you still have those guys that are coming back and getting healthy at the right time, you can make a run. And it's kind of like Jamie said here, whether it's talking about fantasy or NFL, we've seen teams make the playoffs with 7 wins. I'm old enough to remember the 7-9 Seahawks getting into the NFL playoffs and then winning a game in the first round. Oh, I guess the Saints, I actually believe, right?
Yeah, Marshawn Ryan. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Beastquake. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I mean, it goes into being patient, man. The real season starts around week 5, week 6 there. Another lesson that's going to go in here, and we kind of touched on a little bit, is don't sell low on injured players that are coming back in the season. So like some of the guys that I'm going to name that I played in the playoffs that ended up kind of winning weeks for me, T. Higgins. He was a mess this year, but I got just low ball after low ball after low ball. If you got room on the IR, just stash him on the bench there. Jonathan Taylor, league winner for me in a couple of leagues there. Aaron Jones, Breece Hall is a guy that got off to a slow start, was kind of banged up. League winner for me right there. So on those guys that are going to be injured, I can understand if they're out for the year and you need to get some help in there. But when they're going to be back in season, if you're not getting a good offer on them, do not sell low. Like you are better off just hanging off, let them come back, have a good game or two. Because now if I want to sell T. Higgins, the price I'm going to get from him is so much higher this offseason. And if I would have tried to sell him in week 9, when he hasn't played all year long. So yeah, injured players, like make sure you're differentiating between the guys that are going to be out the rest of the year than the guys that are going to come back. So I think there's a lesson to be learned just with how many guys got injured this year, that they're going to come back and there's going to be an opportunity if they're good enough.
Also just in injuries in general. Because again, like Cooper Kupp was a guy I loved this year. It didn't work out obviously early in the season, but I stayed, pat with him in any league that I had him. And you see the emergence of Puka, right? And maybe you were lucky enough to get Puka, right? And you had both of them. I know that I won a league where I did. And there was times that I'm looking at my roster some weeks going, man, could I cut, Cooper Kupp or try to trade him here because I have Puka. Who knows what he's going to be coming back. And he's been great. He's going to be absolutely probably my number 1 receiver this weekend in DFS. Already looked, he's 7,500 this week. I think that Detroit Rams game is going to be just an absolute barn burner, and his numbers in the playoffs are historic. I love that they set him last week. I think that says so much about they know they need him for this next run. and just like go back and look. But we knew he had the pedigree, and just because he had that, CMC's another guy, right? Like that we had all those concerns because of the injuries, and people kept kind of letting him fall further and further. And now you look at it, we're almost 2 full years of him being healthy, being the number one back. And, people just, I don't know, sometimes it's almost like until you see evidence of these guys decline, these players seem to be recovering from injuries so much better than they used to. And also just their careers are extending. And I think, again, it's all the science and data and stuff that goes into it. But you just, make sure a guy's dead before you let go of him. I mean, Taylor's the one to me that really sticks out, because you probably could have got Jonathan Taylor this year for nothing. And I think he's the number one back in Dynasty moving forward still. Like,
I bought him,
right?
I bought him 2 days ago for like what I still feel like is a little bit of a value. I got him straight up for Brandon Ayuk, and I love Brandon Ayuk. But I mean, we're talking about a top 5 Dynasty running back when he's healthy. Whereas Brandon Ayuk, he's going to have those big splashes.
With Anthony Richardson and a Shane Steichen offense, good times are ahead for Jonathan Taylor.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm a big JT guy. So he's a good one here. Jamie here, I feel this right here. His New Year's resolution not to take over any orphan teams already failed, taking over 32-12.
And you were trying to sell one to me.
So I've almost got all of my orphans filled. I think I have 3 more spots left. So if anybody wants to take over some horrible rebuild teams that are pretty cheap, only like $25, let me know. But they are bad, just know. But yeah, I so far I've stayed strong. I haven't joined any new leagues. I had one other analyst kind of reach out about, hey, let's do like a salary cap league, and I just of course it's just like, fine, take my money, let's do it. But he has not reached back out yet to me yet, so I have not joined any new leagues yet. So still holding in strong right there. JT, T. Higgins, those are 2 of my biggest buys this year. T's going to get a contract from somebody, even if it's just like a franchise tag this year. TJT, those are good buys. Dion, what we learned, not have the greatest draft to win championship. Yep. And on that note, we do have a drafting section coming up to hopefully help improve those drafts. So it makes it even a little bit easier going on there. And then the last thing that I wanted to just kind of quickly touch on here in the be patient section, and I feel like it's really important kind of coming up because we've been really spoiled like the last 3-4 years with rookies that come in and make an immediate impact. Like this year we even had 2 tight ends that came in and have had like top 12 seasons. That's like extremely unheard of for rookies. So it's going to be, you got to let rookies develop. JSN, I feel like is a perfect example of this. Everybody doesn't come in and is Puka Nacua and is just, a wide receiver 1 right away from the time to step on the field. And we've seen the flashes of JSN coming on strong. So make sure you let those rookies develop. I just feel like these next few years with how many instant producers we've had, we're going to see guys that kind of fall by the wayside because they don't put up top 12 numbers in their first 8 games. And then there's going to be teams that want to get rid of them, sell low. Rashee Rice was one of those came on strong in the second half that at one point you could have probably got him for like a late 2nd round pick straight up. And then now he looks like a legitimate piece of the future. So just with how much good rookies we've had right away, just keep in mind that's not normal. It's just kind of been a thing that's been more normal these last few years. And I kind of feel like at some point that's going to kind of swing back a little bit to where, your rookies mostly come on more in that second half of the season outside of like 2 or 3 guys, let alone like the 5, 6, 7 we've had these last 2 years of just instant rookie producers.
Prime example, a guy I was really high on last year and it paid off this year was James Cook. And last year I looked dumb, right? Like I looked like people are going, this guy's not a, everyday back. In the NFL, he's not even like an RB2 or 3. Right. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I really believe bet in talent. And that's why like Bryce Young is the guy I mentioned. I know everybody wants to say the world is falling and he's awful. Look at what happened with T-Law in Jacksonville in a very similar situation with just a trash offensive line, no weapons. Mm-hmm. We're about to get a new GM there. I really do believe in Bryce Young. I don't think people were wrong that if you're just looking at talent-wise, he was the better pro prospect than CJ Stroud. I know now everybody's like, oh, you can't say. I do, but it's okay.
I was a Stroud guy. Yeah.
I know. I get it.
Yeah.
And it's easy right now to say, oh, Stroud's this and that. I really do, though. I mean, you look at like the Panthers, it's the worst probably organization top to bottom in the NFL.
100%.
He's got a horrible offensive line. He's got no weapons. And Bryce still had a 5-game stretch near the end of the season where he was top 10 in QBR 5 straight weeks. So I just give some time for these kids. Like, another one is Jordan Love, right? Like Jordan Love was the guy
guys are
that
rewarded
early
for him
this year, people were saying he was done after waiting all that time. And now, I mean, maybe there's 6, 7 QBs I would rather have because of, and this is again where I get into like with Brock Purdy, the offense they're in and stuff.
In my last update. Yeah.
I mean, he's going to be in great shape. Got a bunch of great weapons around, a really smart coach, good offensive scheme, great organization. So you just, bet on talent. Because, I mean, again, there was a reason the Packers took him to supplant Aaron Rodgers, and everybody wanted to hammer him for it. And I don't hear everybody apologizing that, hey, we were wrong. You were right. You know what I'm saying? You got 2 more great years out of Aaron Rodgers, and now you have the youngest team in the NFL in the playoffs with your first-year quarterback who looks like he's your QB of the future.
Yeah, just a couple of things I want to touch real quick. If you head to the website today, I actually read an article that came out today talking about some deep league stashes. One of the guys that was in there was Keith Flemming, because he was at 15% rostered. And kind of my thought there was, I was like, hey, a lot has to go wrong for him to get on the field. He's been effective in a little bit of time he's came on here, but I want as many pieces of that Packers passing game as I can get, especially on the cheap. Christian Watson hasn't been able to stay healthy. All their other receivers have kind of missed a game or two here or there. He's free on waivers right now, so got guys like him and 11 other guys that are anywhere from 11% to 45% rostered in sleeper dynasty league. So yeah, go check that out. And then Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, man, that's a rough one. I had to go on the show trying to defend him as a top 12 quarterback earlier this year. And Dustin looks like you were right on that one. I think he had dropped him down to 16 or 17.
I think he's banged up.
It is a rough one. Yeah,
it was. There was a lot of stuff though that went wrong for them. You look at the numbers when they had Zay Jones, Ridley, and Kirk, they were really good offensively. So what is this topic about? Be patient. Trevor Lawrence is the number 1 pick just 4 years ago, and he has shown signs that he can be that guy. I mean, he's won playoff games, right? Or what playoff game? Be patient.
Yeah. Agreed with you there. All right, moving on to our next section here. And this is kind of a few things that I'm kind of taking into next season when it comes to trading here. And the first one here, and it's came just a little bit to my the entire way that I've shifted viewing running backs in Dynasty to where anymore, I'm not looking at any running back unless they're a rookie 3 years down the road. What are they doing for me this year, and what are they going to do for me next year? Outside of that, I don't care, because there's so much that happens that unless you're an elite Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor type, who knows where you're going to be in 2 years there. So that's one of the things that I'm going to not be afraid to target the cheap veteran running backs and startups and trades, especially if they have a good coach and a quarterback system. You kind of saw it with Joe Mixon before Joe Burrow went down. He was starting to get into a groove. Kamara had, at least competent enough play to get him a couple of dump downs a game to bring up his fantasy numbers. You could get a lot of those guys for late seconds, maybe a first down in 2026, and you can get one of these guys and a second back this year. So I'm not going to be afraid to fill out my roster with some of those cheap veteran running backs, especially if I have my wide receivers, my tight ends, my quarterbacks in place. Before, I'm the type that I was always I want to get all these guys off my roster as soon as they hit 26. This last year, I shifted a little bit. I kind of bought in on some of the guys like Aaron Jones. I think Austin Eckler's going to be a guy that has a value drop so much this offseason. He becomes a buy for me next year. James Conner is another one that you got super cheap that was a league winner this year. So I'm going to go a little bit more on that. And I don't really care for running backs 26, 27. If they're locked into a starting role for this year, I'm not going to hesitate to go out and buy them, especially when that price is, late second, third rounder in some of these cases.
I would still look at their touches, though. I think that you are correct in that, but I think a lot of that is the fact that these backs don't get the total rush attempts that they used to. I think the number is if they hit 300 or more carries, it's 4 or 5 seasons in a row. It's just, literally across the board, they fall.
Yeah, I remember reading an article. I think 287 or 289 was the magic number, something like that. Yeah.
And so to me, that's what I would be looking at is I agree with you, but I would be concerned with some of these guys say Derrick Henry, who has
I was going to ask you about him.
So many miles on his tires. And I know he's the ultimate freak. I hear, again, who wants to bet against Derrick Henry? I love watching him play, but I just know from history that when guys get the rock that much, usually there is a fall off. And to Jamie's point, it's one thing I love about Nick Chubb. I know he's coming off injury, but Chubb still has not had a monster carry season 5 years in. And
he's just been injured clear back to the Georgia days, man. I can remember watching him in college just being oh man, he's gonna be so good if he can just stay healthy. And they're knee injuries, I'm pretty sure, every single time too, right?
I still would bet on Nick Chubb, though. I really would. I love the fact that he's in the Browns organization, which they're going to make it an input on running the football. And I do. I believe Chubb. These guys come back from those knee injuries. And the main thing about Chubb is that a lot of it's so much, how do they work? How bad do they want it? There is nobody that wants to play football more than Nick Chubb. And I love the fact that in college, he was with Todd Gurley most of the time, so he didn't get a huge load there. And even in the NFL, like this was hopefully going to be the first season where the Browns really gave him the ball, because it was frustrating the last 2 years that, he was putting up these great numbers, but he's getting like 15 rush attempts a game.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what the Browns do next year. Like, I don't know off the top of my head if Jerome Ford's still under contract, but if so, like he can kind of carry the load while Chubb works back in, has a stronger second half of the season here. Oh man, you want to know what kind of like 5% of me inside is like, I just want this to happen so bad this offseason. I want the Cowboys to just go through like a 1-year crazy, like incentive-laden contract with Derrick Henry. Come be the running back and just, you don't need to get 25 carries a game. You get 15 to 18 and let Dak do the rest and just be freaking ultra efficient with those 15 touches and just plow over the middle of the linebackers. Because like right now, that's where we struggle, is we're not consistent enough with the run game. Like pretty much every week at this point, Dak is showing up. You get a guy like Henry in there, man. Who I think that could be real good for a year. I don't want to throw 2-3
Go get Cordell Patterson, who's cheaper and can do almost everything Derrick. I'm telling you, like,
man, I don't know, man.
It's a situation. You look at Patterson's not like, because what you're talking about, to me, Derrick Henry at this point is a short yardage back. He's a short yardage back. Like that's what he is, because I mean, what do he have, 300 or 400 yard games this season, and that was it. He played every game. So man, it would scare me. I mean, maybe if it's incentive, I get you. I think somebody's going to take the bait.
We don't need him to be Tennessee Titans 30.
I'm not saying
200
that,
yard a game.
Just
come in and do 70, 80 yards and a touchdown every other game, man. And that's more than we. I mean, look what we got with Tony Pollard this year. Like Derrick Henry could come in and do that.
That's my point, though, is like, to me, with running backs, you can always, that's why I'm so mad at my Falcons for drafting Bijan, who's great. But it's like we were already all pro. Like we weren't struggling running the ball. Cordell Patterson, Tyler Algier. And it's the same deal in fantasy with me, which I know you kind of were getting to, is that I punt on running backs. I just like, if I can get CMC or something like that, that's totally different. But they're very rare cases. Like Breece Hall would probably be, like Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor would be the only 2 young backs that I would be willing to spend to get in Dynasty right now.
Really? Even over like Gibbs?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
True workhorses that I know are going to just get fed a lot. I mean, like that's the identity of both of those, franchises. And I love the fact that Rodgers is coming back next year. Like I think that is going to think about the year Breece Hall had, and he did it with the quarterbacks that he did. Everybody wants to give Garrett Wilson his kudos, which he deserves, but Breece Hall did it with teams knowing they were going to run the ball.
And that's like kind of goes to like the second note I had on here, where it's like, especially the running backs that have like a good quarterback or coach, and like so it's not like it is back in the day where it's like, oh, there's no quarterback, so this running back's getting 35 touches a game, he's a fantasy god. Like I would rather have a running back getting 18 touches in like a well-ran offense than like a guy getting 30 in a crap offense anytime with this, like especially with the injury rate. Like give me that all day. Next thing here in the trade market, kind of that I'm going to take into next year, and it worked for me multiple times this year, is you really got to kind of follow that calendar cycle when you're buying and selling picks here. So in one league, I was able to go out and get Breece Hall and my first rounder back at the trade deadline from a team trying to make a push. At that time, if you remember, so our deadline's week 13. So like weeks 10, 11, 12 were pretty rough for Breece Hall. Like I think he'd barely hit double digits because he had like 6 or 7 catches in it. And he finished with like 10, 11, and 9 points or something like that. So I was able to go send some vets out for him, and I got him and my first rounder back at the deadline from a team trying to make a push for the playoffs. And now, I ended up winning that league. I got my first round pick back, and I got Breece Hall. So I'm sitting real good in that league right now. And so like you go and try and make that same trade right now, like you're not getting a first round pick from that owner right now, but you're able to do that at the deadline. That's when you want to sell those picks and you want to go buy those picks.
Supply and demand, right? Like it's all about knowing when people need stuff, and you can kind of lean on them a little bit. But it does, again, this gets back to, again, for these young guys, bet on talent. Breece Hall was, I mean, seriously, like they compared him to Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, like the name of backs that he was being compared to, like whether you want to look at analytically or just what he did in his performances in college. And because of what happened the first year, people were kind of down on him. And it's just talent usually wins. You know what I mean? And like, that's why just these guys that have this unbelievable play, it's why Kyle Pitts, again, I'm a Falcons guy, I'll go ahead and tell you, but it may not be in Atlanta, but I believe he's historic talent. Eventually it's going to pop somewhere. It just is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one more thing, let me expand on this, just so I shouldn't assume everybody has seen this kind of chart, this cycle that I'm referring to. But if you hit me up on Twitter, I can send it to you. I wish I could remember who put it out, but it was one of the Dynasty sites a few years ago that kind of put out like a calendar cycle of when to buy and sell draft picks. And essentially the best time to buy draft picks
season, right?
Best time to buy is at the trade deadline. So when teams are trying to get rid of those picks for vet assets, best time to sell your picks is when you are on the clock, basically, because that's when you're gonna get the maximum value. People have gotten rookie fevers. So like right now, like I remember it kind of goes like 1 through 5 on like when you should buy and sell. And if I remember right, like right now, they're saying that the draft picks have gone from about like a 1 to like more like a 2 or 3. And then if you wait a little bit more, get to like March, April, when you're close to the draft, then that's when those are going to be the 4 and the 5 value. So you're going to be able to
let ESPN do the work for you and hype up all these guys.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just right now you're kind of in the spot where it's your last chance to kind of buy draft picks this offseason at somewhat of a discount. But the closer we get, especially once the Super Bowl ends and then everyone kind of shifts their focus to rookies, that's when all those draft pick values are going to kind of skyrocket. At that point, then that's when you kind of want to look to kind of shift to selling them, because you're not going to get the best value unless you're able to draft and hit on a guy like, like a Gibbs or a CJ Stroud, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jamie, I won't get into this one here. One of my New Year's resolutions also that's not listed here is to not argue about trade deadlines and Dynasty anymore, but I'm a trade deadline at the end of week 13 guy. You gotta plan for 14, 15, 16, and 17 on your own. But other than that, trade the rest of the year. All right. Next couple of things I got for trades here, and they kind of can be rolled together here. And so there's going to be like, don't be afraid to shop guys that are top 5 in the offseason. That value is locked in right now. You saw guys like Kenneth Walker that at one point was like the Dynasty RB 2 or 3 last offseason. We saw we've seen stories like that every single year of guys that'll have like one huge peak year and then they never have that top 5 value and they drop into more being like a top 12, top 15 value. So I'm not saying
David Njoku.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying to sell every single top 5 guy, but don't be afraid to put them out on the blocks. There's a lot of times that you can get hauls back for these guys, especially in the offseason when teams are thinking like, oh, I don't have to set a lineup next week. I just got to go get the best players as possible. So don't be afraid to shop them. And then on the opposite side, don't be afraid to take big swings. One of my favorite things to do is to buy low on injured guys. So like Tank Dell, he's a guy that I'm going to be targeting hard this offseason. And I'm a big guy in building depth. So I'm not saying go out and trade 4 quality starters to go get your Jamar Chases, but don't be afraid to take those big swings when the value is there. Like when you have a chance to go get, a Breece Hall who's coming off a 4 or 5 game slump, take those big swings. Like sometimes they blow up in your face and they don't work out, but sometimes it works out perfectly.
Yeah. I mean, again, CMC was a guy 2 years ago that it really became kind of a hot button topic in fantasy of like, do you take him with a top 5 pick? I mean, literally that was a thought last year. And even this year, people were still concerned about it, even after him being healthy all of last year and having the success in San Francisco. And then, I mean, he was unquestionably the most valuable guy in fantasy.
Absolutely. All right. We're going to kick it over to some things we're going to take into next year for drafting. And so this one is for most of my leagues are going to be super flex, especially when we're talking Dynasty. And it's something I started kind of doing real hard the last 2 years. And it's every team I do that I've done this with, I have success. And the number one mission in super flex leagues is getting 2 top 12 quarterbacks. Having those 2 elite guys every single week can cover up so many warts and down weeks at your other positions. I mean, Lamar Jackson was a guy that you're getting in the late first. So I traded up for a lot of leagues and grabbed Lamar in the late first round this year to pair with whoever I grabbed early. And every single one of those teams made the playoffs. And so just every super flex team I'm in, no matter what, I want 2 top 12 quarterbacks if possible. Even if you're kind of overpaying a little bit to make it happen, it's just the team building is so much easier when you have 50 guaranteed points a week coming from those 2 spots. At that point, then you just need a receiver, 1 or 2 wide receivers, or a running back, 1 or 2 wide receivers. And at that point, you're back in contention every single week. And then you just got to find a few more spots to fill in there. But yeah, number one mission there, whatever it takes, get 2 top 12 quarterbacks in those leagues.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Nope. Not much else to add there. Another one here for drafting. And this kind of goes in, it kind of be looped into like the not letting the 4 games at the start of the year kind of really affect how you're going to take guys the rest of the year. But I'm not going to let guys drop more than like a round or 2 past their redraft ADP in Dynasty League when the main issue is age and not concern. When I say that, I'm talking about guys like Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, guys who have not shown any signs of slowing down on the field. And the biggest knock against them every offseason is, oh, they're 30. Oh, he's 32. If they're still putting up numbers like that, man, I'm not gonna let that. If they're going round 3 in redraft leagues, and I'm a dynasty startup, and they're there at the end of the 4th, the 5th round, I don't care if they're older. If they're still putting up numbers on the field, I'm gonna take that swing on them. But very, very important to differentiate there. Make sure the thing that is knocking them down is age and not production. Very big distinction there. But there's a lot of guys like that, like Alvin Kamara at the running back position, Aaron Jones when he was healthy, he was still putting up numbers, and there was no signs of slowing down. It was just, they got a little bit older this offseason. That was the only real knock against them.
Yeah, Mike Evans has been on this list for like 5 years, and I continue to sell him short, and he continues to have like 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. So I
Travis Kelce.
Agree with that.
He's the same way. Every year he's on a do not draft list.
I will say that Kelce could be swapping though from that, because now we are seeing both age and decline, right? Like now he does not look like the same player on the field. Correct. And that does, absolutely. I mean, like you do see stuff. Like, I mean, I know that we're not, NFL executives, but we watch a lot of football, and you just notice like guys look slower, guys, you know what I'm saying? And he might be one of those guys that forever has been on that list, but now like next year I would have real concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next one here. And this one, it's going to be kind of not like one size fits all, but for me, it's going to be trust your own scouting process. And so if you're kind of listening to this, what that means, even if that means, hey, I find these 5 guys, these 5 analysts that I really like and I trust, find your process. And once you've kind of gotten your own opinions, trust that. Don't get swayed by the group think. So I got some of the examples that pop out into my head here is we have one league that we did last year that we draft the rookie draft before the NFL draft. And so when I went into that one, all I had was like my tiers. So like nobody's on an NFL team yet. So I'm just straight going off how I rank the guys on my tiers. That was one of my best teams this year because I was grabbing rookies over vets where it looked like an overdraft at the time. But then you look at it now and it's like, well, that's about how the ADP looks a year later. That's one of my best teams, and I'm set up for the future there. So when you put in the work, or when you've listened to the guys that have put in the work, trust your gut on those. There's nothing worse than overthinking it and being like, God dang it. Now Tank Dell and Puka Nacua are on another team tearing it up. And like I had them as late 2nd round picks. Like one of the things that really made that click for me this year is watching the NFL draft and my pre-draft ranks that I put out the night before. And I still have them up. You can go see them. I have the receipts here. But my top 10 running backs were the top 10 running backs drafted in order, except for one player. I had Izzy Abanikanda at 6. He went 9. Every other player in the top 10 running backs, I had it in the exact order it went. So at that point, I was kind of like, all right, when you put in the work, you got to trust your gut. Don't let others sway you. There's nothing worse than just when you knew something was going to happen, but you didn't listen to your gut. And then now you see that blowing up on another team. Just trust when you put in the work.
Yeah. And also, I think take advantage of if you love the situation, right? Because for me, there's nothing better than when you like a young player and you love where they end up. James Cook was the example last year in Buffalo. I was like, man, that's just like the perfect landing spot for him. Didn't work out last year, but it did this year. Zay Flowers was that guy this year for me in Baltimore, because being a Georgia fan, I knew what was going to happen to this Baltimore offense with Todd Monken taking the reins. And then Zay Flowers was a guy I already loved and thought was arguably one of the best wide receivers in the draft. So now he is going to be on a team that I know is going to run a much more up-tempo offense and unleash arguably the most talented quarterback in the NFL. It was just, he was somebody that I had in every league.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Zay was up there. He was one of my most drafted rookies. I mean, I think we talked about it before the draft, even we were both all in on Zay there, especially once he landed there in that Monken system. And then the last kind of drafting note that I want to touch on here, and it's going to be a big one, I think, after like we kind of touched on these last few years of rookies, is look for overreactions or overcorrections during draft season, kind of based off of this season that just happened. Like, for example, like we normally don't have tight ends that produce right away, let alone guys like Laporta, Kincaid, even Michael Mayer had some flashes. So I'm not going to be surprised if next year, if you see like outside of Brock Bowers, some of the tight ends right below him, like the Bells, the Sanders, I wouldn't be surprised if you see them get pushed up a little bit higher just based off of kind of what happened this year. Not saying they're not going to be good players, but look for those type of overreactions. Like last year, that's kind of goes on with the guys on the pup. Like those guys dropped like 2-3 extra rounds from where they would have been just because they missed 4 games. So you're going to be looking for those overreactions based off things that kind of happened this year that were just kind of one-off things that don't normally happen every single year. Another one that I think is going to be kind of a trend you'll see next year is defense this year was up. like, I don't know if you looked at like the quarterbacks around, like all the top quarterbacks, almost all of them have double-digit interceptions this year. Like there's a lot of years where that doesn't happen. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a year or two you kind of see that switch back to where the offenses figure it back out, and then you see a renaissance.
It actually swapped
taken back
mid-season. I read a great article on The Ringer that they were not calling certain defensive penalties the first like 9-10 weeks of the season. And if you look, the offensive numbers were historically down. Like, I mean, back decades. The NFL obviously adjusted because those penalties started being called the last 8 weeks, and the scoring went up by like almost 8 points a game. So
interesting.
You saw it like immediately, right? Like the NFL understands this. Like, I know there's some people that want to watch a 6-3 slugfest, and God bless you. I don't. Like, I want to watch good football. I want to watch teams be able to pass and move around. And I think the NFL understands that's what most people want to watch. And it's always going to skew to the offense. And this was a prime example because, to your point, the defense kind of gained an advantage in a decision that they made with the referees that we're just not going to call this as much. And the minute they saw a direct correlation to scoring and offense output, they changed it, like literally mid-season.
Yeah. So yeah, look for those types of things that are just kind of weird things that don't normally happen, and don't let those skew what you're going to do that next year. Jamie's asking, was there a guy you wouldn't touch last year as a rookie? His was QJ. I don't know if I had a player that I was fully out on. I was low on Quentin Johnson. I think I had him down at wide receiver 4 pre-draft. And that's kind of one of those, I got swayed a little bit by the groupthink on him. When I watched his tape, I didn't really like what I saw. I was like, he doesn't separate a lot. Like he doesn't really catch, like he doesn't catch the ball that well. He doesn't go up and attack it. Like I was a little skeptical. I wish I would have been more negative on, not more, I guess, yeah, more negative. I wish I'd been lower on Quentin Johnson and kind of been more against the crowd on that one. But it was one of those where I was like, man, like I don't really like him, but if everybody else that I trust does, like maybe I'm missing something. So I'll kind of leave him here at like 4 or 5 outside of like the Zay, Addison, JSN type guys. But outside of that, I don't know if there was really like Bryce Young, I guess, like where he was going in drafts. I didn't take him anywhere. I had multiple leagues where I traded back from 102.
Completely agree. Once I saw he went to Carolina, like once he went to Carolina, I didn't want any, like that was literally when me and Joe talked about, you know, in the preseason, there's like usually 4 or 5 teams. It's like, I'm not touching them. Like, I'm just not.
Will Levis is my answer here. And I'm not sure. I may have been wrong on that one, but Will Levis was a guy.
I was actually impressed by him.
Anywhere in the late first round. Yeah. But yeah, he looks pretty good now. So maybe he might be my answer on this one. Or he was a guy where he was going, I definitely wasn't touching at the time. But yeah, man, he looks good. He has not seen a throw that guy does not think he can make. And so he's a lot of fun to watch.
I see the Josh Allen comparisons now, which I thought were ridiculous coming in, but watching him play in the NFL, like he's bigger, stronger, faster than I thought he was, and he's got a great arm.
Yeah, he's got a cannon. He's fun, man. All right, so here is a kind of our last little section here of kind of 4 things that we're going to touch on here. And these are all kind of things that are related more to like real life NFL things that kind of translate back to fantasy. And so the first guy here, the first thing I'm going to talk about, and the guy that I had in mind with this is Raheem Mostert. Having an opportunity to return to a system that like that matters. We've seen it with multiple guys this year that kind of came back that were a little bit slept on in the offseason that, hey, you're coming back to a system, you know the coordinators, you know the offense, you know how it runs, and you come in, you can have career seasons like this. Granted, I'm not saying every running back that returns to his team, like Brian Robinson is not going to be Raheem Mostert next year if he comes back to Washington. But when you have those guys that are talented in those high-octane offenses and they're coming back, you know, he was kind of left for dead. Like there's teams taking Jeff Wilson ahead of him in draft season back last year. Achane was going way ahead of him. And I mean, Mostert was a league winner. So I'm going to pay attention to those guys, receivers, running backs, tight ends that are kind of a little bit left for dead. Like Cole Kmet was the same way this year. He was left for dead coming back into that same system, or I guess a little bit different system there, but same offense there. And he kept right back in where he was. So I'm going to be a little bit more cognizant of the guys that are coming back and then getting slept on for incomers. Travis Etienne, you know, when Tank Bigsby came in, everyone kind of dropped him down a couple rounds. That was like one of the biggest coach things ever. And so, yes, I'm going to pay attention to those guys that are returning. Kenneth Walker, they're going to have the upper hand and they're going to have the better chance to get in there and produce. Yeah.
And I also, again, just systems matter in general. I was really high on the Lions offense this year because I believe in their offensive coordinator. Look at all the guys that they had that ended up, you know, having big seasons. Packers, again, I think LaFleur is one of the best. Like, I agree. The Niners, right? Like these teams, they have multiple guys that end up being fantasy breakouts, especially the ones that you can get later in drafts. So I really do. I try to pay attention to like who is that? Again, Todd Monken with the Ravens, right? Like it bumped all these Ravens up. Like I have Gus Edwards in a ton of leagues. And I mean, I remember looking at it first going, I can't believe I went in with Dobbins and Edwards, and it paid off, right? So you just, you have to, kind of pay attention to the schemes and stuff because it makes a huge difference. These offensive coordinators, the really good ones, whether they're a head coach or the offensive coordinator, but we know they're calling it. It's unbelievable the difference they can make and what they can do. You look at like McDaniels with his running backs, right? It doesn't matter who he puts back there. He's going to be good. So if you get an opportunity to get one of the Dolphins running backs, you probably should take it.
Yep, absolutely there. Kind of, like you said, the system and the scheme that matters there. And that kind of goes right into my next one here. And it's kind of a weird one because through like 10 weeks, this wasn't really anything that I was really paying much attention to. But as you've seen the rails kind of fall off with the Eagles these last few years, I'm going to not underrate when teams lose both coordinators in an offseason. That first 10 weeks, like Hurts, Smith, and AJ Brown were still putting up numbers, but it was ugly. Like it was sloppy when you actually watched like the real NFL games. Like it was more so like sloppy, AJ Brown, 45-yard touchdown, boom, there's an extra 10 points to his fantasy day. And then now this last few weeks, like you've seen it really kind of start to come off the rails. So, and I mean, we mentioned it earlier with Steichen, man, that guy looks like the real freaking deal in Indianapolis. So just one thing I want to pay attention to is when teams lose both coordinators in one offseason, I'm just going to kind of put a little bit of a flag up on those and take a little bit more caution in those areas, unless we're talking about like an absolute stud.
I don't even think it's just both coordinators. I always look back to Shanahan in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. Atlanta was literally the best offense in a decade, one of the best ever. Matt Ryan was an MVP, 2 running backs, scored 10 touchdowns. They had like 3 wide receivers, I think with at least 7. And so the next year, all those guys were overvalued. And the reason they were overvalued was because Shanahan left. And he's the reason for the offense. And it's just like if Detroit ends up losing Johnson, I would be very concerned about all those guys having regression because it happens. Like it's been proven he's a great play caller. He's a great schemer. Like the Lions do some of the best and smartest stuff in the NFL on offense. If he's gone, unless they get somebody really good, there's going to be a hit, and you have to kind of anticipate that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And then my last 2 things here, we'll kind of group them together because they kind of go hand in hand here. And I'm not sure exactly the best way to do it that I'm going to do it this year, but I got to find a better way to learn how to sort like the fake preseason news, the Tank Bigsby from like the real news where like we heard about Puka being invited to the Breakfast Club in like week 2 of the preseason. I can remember hearing that and like, oh, that's cute, but I'm not going to draft him still. Like, okay, cool. But then it ended up, Tank Dell, the same way you heard CJ Stroud back when they got drafted, he was telling coaches, hey, I want you to go get Tank Dell. So it's just, I got to figure out a way to kind of do a better job of separating just like that pure coach speak from like the actual preseason news. And that kind of relates into my last point here is I'm going to be less of a hater on kind of the waiver wire guys that come out of nowhere. It's caused me to miss out on some of the guys like Puka was available in some leagues at the start of the preseason. I like Jerome Ford. He was available in so many leagues. I missed out on a lot of him. Kyron Williams was available in a lot of leagues. I missed out on him just because I was kind of like, I think it's just more situation than the talent there. But then those guys, sometimes just getting in that situation gives you a chance to showcase that talent. And then these guys are here to stay. So going to kind of find a way.
That's kind of my point. Like with the last thing is that McVay's one of the best offensive minds in football. So when you have a guy that's young, which both Puka and Kyron Williams were, and there's this chance that they could have it. I mean, because Kupp's older, right? We know there's going to eventually be another alpha wide receiver. I know people go, well, how long will Stafford be there? Who cares? It's Sean McVay. He's going to figure it out. He got Jared Goff to the Super Bowl. I promise you.
Unless they win a Super Bowl this year, I think Stafford's coming back next year.
I agree. But I'm saying even if, say, he did retire, he won with Jared Goff, and not the Jared Goff that we know now in Detroit. We're talking about Jared Goff that, again, they traded Matthew Stafford basically for, straight up in a pick. So I believe in these systems. And McVay, again, one of the smartest offensive minds. If you see a young guy come available in an offense like this, it's just like also for like with CJ Stroud now. We all pretty much know CJ Stroud's that dude, right? So any wide receiver that comes up with Houston in the next couple of years, you treat them like you would somebody when they went to Manning or Brady, right? Mm-hmm. That there's a good chance, just like with the Chiefs guys. I know Rashee Rice is that guy, and that's great if you got him. They're going to need more. So when they draft more receivers, you need to be on these guys because they're going to have Patrick Mahomes throwing to them and, opportunities coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of CJ Stroud, didn't make the stash article. He was just a little bit too much roster. But Xavier Hutchinson, another guy I'm trying to stash this offseason, but he was at like 55%. So he came in.
Mechie doesn't look like that guy, which is disappointing because of the injury and stuff.
He just had like a bad string of luck with. He got cancer, right? Like right after he got drafted.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like not his fault, but I really believed in him. Though. I thought he was a great player in college.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie got a question here. We buying Roschon Johnson with the Foreman contract ended. For the right price, like I wouldn't give up like a high second in this year's draft to go get him. I don't think. Again, you want to let these rookies develop. A lot of guys don't come on until their second and third years, but they routinely went to Khalil Herbert when he was healthy over him. So with how much draft capital they have this year, with how much free cap space they have this year, I feel like they're actually in a little bit of a good position if they can fill in that offensive line and some of the other defensive positions through the draft, that they can maybe go get a running back or two as a stopgap there.
That would be my concern, is they have so many draft picks. They have they're in the best situation in football. I just don't know if he's definitely going to be like even get a chance to be the guy next year. You know what I mean? And that's what would concern me. I actually think he's a very talented guy, but there's just the Bears are so much. Like, we don't know what's going to happen, right? Like, we don't know if Fields is going to be there. We don't know if they're going to take Harrison Jr. We don't they could end up having another 3 first-rounders if they trade so, I mean, they're going to have so much capital if they want to, add a back, whether it be through a trade or free agency, or they would just want to draft, a more talented guy. They've got opportunities to do it, and that's why I'd be concerned about Johnson, but not from a talent perspective. I think he's a good player, and it's going to be a good situation. Like, the Bears is a team that, if you got guys locked in like DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, I think they're only going to, their roles are only going to get better because it's going to get, stronger around them, whether it be Fields coming back or Caleb Williams, obviously. And then, they're going to address the offensive line and, continue to upgrade pieces.
Yeah. Like, I'm trying to think like what I would give up. Like, I don't think this will get it done, but like if I could get him for like a third or 2/3, like, sure, at that point I'll take a swing. But I don't think anywhere in the top 24 picks of this draft, I think I'd rather take a swing on some of the guys coming in this year. There's
a lot of really talented guys.
Yep. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, so we got one more thing here to kind of round it out. And this is kind of my bottom line here. And this is just kind of a good reminder for everybody here. And when it comes down to it, it's just trust your gut. Like, it's good. You have your good friends and your sources that you trust and you cross-check, but like ultimately own your own decisions. Like, there's a few things that kind of came to mind here. Like in the semifinals this year, I was checking everybody's ranks. I was talking to everybody. Pretty much every single person was like, let's go Cole Kmet over Dalton Kincaid. Well, that sucked. Flip that around. Kincaid went off, ended up winning the league, ended up winning that week. So it was okay. But like the other side of that was I had the same week there looking at George Kittle versus DeAndre Swift going back and forth. I was like, I'm going to trust my gut, go Kittle. And then he tore up the Giants. I think was it Christmas Day? Who did they play? Who did the Niners play?
Oh, they played the Ravens, but he had a good game.
The Ravens, yeah. And so he had a good game there on them. So just ultimately, like, have your sources, have your people you talk to, but own your own decisions. There's nothing worse than like when you go against your gut and then that blows up in your face. So just that's the number one lesson I can give everybody here is just, trust your gut, own your own decisions in the new year, win some titles.
Yeah, I've talked to you about this offline, but like, I've had more success in DFS than ever this year, and I don't think it's a coincidence that I've came on with Chris and Dave. Me and Joe joined this great DFS team already, and I've learned so much from him. One of the biggest lessons Dave Eddy has taught me is you're good at this. Don't worry about what other people are saying. What are you saying? And trust it and go with it. And it's like kind of unleashed me. And, now it's like there's people obviously that everybody checks people's stuff because you respect them, right? You respect their opinion, you respect their takes, but it needs to be a pretty small list because the more noise you hear, the more confusing it gets. And then the harder it is for you to really zone in on an opinion on guys, because it's just human nature that if you hear 15, opinions about a player and 7 of them are positive, 8 are negative, it's going to affect the way you look at it, like whether you, want to admit it or not. So I completely agree with that. I've always said, but it's one of the hardest things to do in fantasy football, stand your ground, because it's a really easy industry to just kind of fall on. Exactly. And I think the truly best people across the board, whether it be Dynasty, DF, whatever, they go by the beat of their own drum, right? And they'll stand by their hits and their misses because we're all going to have those. But you got to trust your gut and your process.
Yeah. And I would say anybody that's listening to this right now, like it is January 8th and you are listening to a Dynasty football podcast for next year already. Like you have some good opinions in your head.
Absolutely.
Like even if you don't trust yourself, like you got to start it. Like you are already putting in the work, getting ready for next year. By the time we get to draft season, April, May, trust the knowledge you've picked up. Like you're clearly putting in the work and you're getting ready for next season now. Like you're not just like a casual fantasy player if you're listening to a Dynasty podcast at this time of the year right now.
Completely agree.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, man. Well, anything else you wanted to add? Anything we kind of missed off our list, you think?
No, I mean, I think this is really good to do. And it's something that I do both in DFS golf and DFS football. I'll be doing it for football in 3-4 weeks, but just, kind of look back at the year. Where did I do well? Yeah. Where did I not? That's what I'm talking about.
That's why you became a fantasy 6-pack member right here.
I love it. Congrats, Jamie. That's the, I mean, it is, it's what it's all about, but it is important to learn, right? And grow and adapt. I mean, not just in life in general, which obviously that's true, but in something like this, like you just have to be willing, don't be stubborn, right? Like learn to move on the fly. I think Dynasty, it's more important other than DFS than in anything because this stuff does, like it can happen fast where if you get in that Breece Hall trade, right?
People get blocked too in Dynasty where it's like JSN was kind of one of those where you saw it at the end of the year where just people were not willing to give up him where it's like, I don't know if he's the number one wide receiver in this class.
No, it's just like DK Metcalf there.
Locked in.
So
it doesn't matter how many times Puka, it doesn't matter if Puka sets the record for yards, interception. I was guilty of that too. Like I had Puka outside of my top 30, I think until like week 5 or 6. I was just like, fuck it. Like
I picked him up in like every league he was available week 1. Like once he had a good game week 1 after all the hype, I was like,
one of the worst trades I ever made, which in the end kind of worked out, but it's like one of those where it's like, oh man, I fucked that up. It was in the preseason, so we had one big Puka preseason game. Flipped him for Matt Stafford and Gabe Davis. Oh, that one hurts in the soul right now.
It does, but Gabe Davis is a guy actually that I still believe in. I mean, if you look at like what he's done with his, like target rate and stuff, it's like it's kind of unbelievable. But and again, let's see what Puka does with a full year with Cup is something also. I know like in 2 years, I think he's obviously great guy, but like next year I am concerned he's going to go back to being the second banana. He's going to be the second banana this weekend. And they have Kyron Williams and he's a really good player, but I think like T Higgins is probably his upside next year. Just because of the situation he's in.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Kind of that like Waddle, Devonta Smith, T Higgins, kind of that top secondary level player. Yeah.
If the top receiver misses, he's going to have monster games, but if they're playing, he's going to be, second in the target pecking order and they have a really good running back right now.
Oh, I got one more question I got to ask you before we go here. So if anybody's still listening, sorry, we're going to be talking about our own leagues here for a second. So we're doing like a playoff fantasy league here. How hot of a take was it to go Amon-Ra 2 over Tyreek?
I think that it's not at all. Like I had Amon-Ra as my number 3 wide receiver this year coming in. And I know he didn't quite. I think in PPR it was close.
4 or 5. He's 4 or 5. Yeah.
I just like if you look at what that dude has done, it's unbelievable. And what I really like about him, and this is why I use him a lot in DFS. I had him in one of my lineups, did really well this weekend. He's so consistent. You can count on like 20 points anytime he has a plus matchup or a game that there's going to be a lot of scoring in. And he's not one of those guys that has like 30, 40, and then has 6. He's going to have 15 to 20 no matter what. And for this league where you have to survive to move on, I think it was like, honestly, man, I might even like him 1 over Lamb, which I know seems crazy, but I think Dallas could end up thumping Green Bay to where I don't think Detroit is going to thump the Rams. And it just, especially if they get down, that could be really good for Amon-Ra this week.
Yeah, I mean, that's my thought was like it's a much better matchup. I mean, the Chiefs defense has not been the problem this year. The Chiefs defense has been really good. Like they're not allowing I think they were like the 6th fewest points allowed to wide receivers.
Actually, the run that's been kind of hurting them lately.
It's going to be 10 degrees there, I think is what I saw next week. And I was like, granted, Tyreek Hill spent the first 5 years of his career.
He got hurt too the last play. That did not look good.
That is true, yeah. But I mean, then again, Amon-Ra kind of got nailed down on the middle of the back too, so he's kind of fighting the.
But again, you also remember Laporta's out. Like I love it. Yes.
That's So I was stressing on it, and I was like, man, I feel like in any league, normally I'd take Tyreek.
I would have taken
one week. I'm going to go Amon-Ra. I'm going to trust in my gut. If I didn't, and then Tyreek goes for 8 and Amon-Ra went for 40, I'd be pissed all off season. So I have to trust in my gut. Amon-Ra over Tyreek this week.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, hey man, I appreciate you stopping by to do this.
Yeah.
What do you got coming out here? I know we're all kind of transitioning a little bit now that football's ending, but what do you got coming out here coming up soon?
So I'll still be doing the DFS Stacks article every Friday. Me and Joe will still be getting together to talk DFS on Thursday through playoffs. And then me and Chris Robin are going to be getting together on Friday to also do a DFS show. So I have 2 DFS shows on Fantasy Six Pack. The article comes out, I think, Friday morning. And then, we'll get right into golf, which is my other DFS love. So,
yeah. Awesome, man. Well, again, I appreciate you guys coming by. For me, we'll be back next Monday with another Dynasty show. I don't remember exactly what I have planned. I do. I'm going to go back and review some of the hot takes and the bold predictions we had from the preseason, from right before the preseason last year. Kind of review, see how those look. We kind of did a review on them, I think, 4 or 5 weeks in, kind of the ones that looked like we were hitting or missing on those ones. So we're going to kind of come back now a full year later and kind of re-review those. And it's funny, some of those ones that looked like they were misses in week 4 that actually ended up being the right call. And then vice versa. Some of the stuff where it's like, oh, we got this right. Like, flash forward to week 17, like, well, nope, we were originally right in the preseason and we were wrong here. So it's just kind of fun to kind of see how things have transitioned from, a certain time period. So we're doing that next Monday. Jamie, I agree. Chris Robin's awesome for DFS too. We got a good crew here for DFS over at Fantasy Six Pack. Find me at Twitter at Dyno NFL. I'll be back next Monday. I said I had an article that came out earlier today, Dynasty Stashes. I'll probably have one article coming out a week on the side. I think most of those are free. I don't think those are behind the paywall. I appreciate you guys all tuning in. We'll talk to you guys next Monday.